Story 1. For almost a year, being broke has been challenging. You find yourself stuck in misery. At least having a job serves as a distraction. Story 2. I was a freelancer for 11 years. It was challenging. Then I got a full-time job for a year. It was great. I was laid off 2 weeks ago due to tariffs, and I am back to being unemployed. It is not a good feeling by any measure. Story 3. I am currently unemployed following my boxing career and do not have an income. I deliver food on my motorcycle during rush hours in an attempt to pay my bills. I am financially struggling, but I have never felt better. Story 4. Yes, it is both the best and the worst. I have a degree and nearly a decade of experience when COVID-19 and the post-pandemic period hit. I sold everything I owned, moved into my car, and worked for a ride-sharing service for 2 years. It was a survivable experience. I felt the most freedom I ever had in my life regarding time and mental health, but I was also the most financially vulnerable I had ever been. I sacrificed a lot to do this, and it gave me time to reflect on what I truly wanted, who I really am as a person, and what I should do about it. It's quite stimulating to find yourself voluntarily at rock bottom. You see all of your options clearly and can build a life plan from scratch. However, you also observe your old friends and family, notice how they are doing, and realize that you are very far behind them socioeconomically. I recommend this journey, but it is very dangerous if you remain in this position for a long time. I spent the first 33 years of my life with background anxiety, existential dread, and unclear goals. I lived without a permanent home for 2 years with minimal responsibilities and goals, and I managed to move back to a better situation. I haven't had any anxiety attacks, toxic thoughts, or self-sabotaging choices in years. Of course, I did not have a spouse, partner, children, or any other commitments, so I was able to be as self-focused as I wanted during this time. Everyone goes through their own journey of enlightenment in different ways. Mine just happened to be based on living like a nomad. Story 5. It was one of the best times of my life. I had been working nonstop for years and saved a lot of money. Everyone was acting as if it were the end of the world because of my layoff. I finally had time for myself. Story 6. I graduated from university during a recession and remained unemployed for 7 or 8 years. With some volunteer work, freelancing, and part-time limited hours jobs scattered throughout that time. I felt bad enough that no one wanted to employ me, but the people I interacted with while claiming unemployment benefits made it even worse. I was disabled, a young graduate doing everything I could, and they still resented my existence. It is difficult, it truly is. Keep your chin up. Story 7. I was evicted from my apartment and couldn't find housing. It became really difficult to stay presentable, and I lost my job. I remained homeless and, with the exception of a few short temporary jobs, jobless for years. It's a cycle. You feel useless and unproductive, and the longer you stay that way, the harder it becomes to be useful and productive again. The cycle broke when an old friend offered me a job and a place to shower regularly. Now I live with roommates in a beautiful house and work as much as I can. Story 8. I am currently going through it, and it is very boring. You are obviously broke, and it is very unpleasant. Story 9. 5 years were challenging. Living off monthly government checks while applying for jobs without any success was frustrating. Story 10. I will break the pattern of the Puritan work ethic on display in this thread and admit that it was the most personally productive time of my life. Being broke and lonely made it impossible to continue, but I have never finished so many projects in such a short period of time before or since. Being self-motivated helps. Reintegration into productive society requires significant capacity for cognitive dissonance that others seem well accustomed to. Story 11. I was unemployed for a whole year, living off what I had saved. I have to tell you, that was the way we were meant to live. I wasn't without income during that time. I did odd jobs here and there on a whim, rested from years of wear and tear, engaged in every hobby I have, and learned many new skills while socializing a lot. I'm not rich by any means. I saved up money over the course of a couple of years specifically so I could do this. I knew I needed a break from the daily grind. It got me thinking, this is pretty much how truly wealthy people live. They attend a few meetings now and then, but most of their days are spent doing whatever they feel like, and their mental and physical health benefits from it. We're not meant to do menial work for upwards of 10 hours a day every day with a short break on the weekend, whether it's physically or mentally taxing. We're not built for this. We're supposed to have much more personal time than we currently have. Story 12. Currently unemployed for 20 months. I am living off my savings and have about another 9 months before I have to start withdrawing from my retirement. Assuming there is anything left given the current administration's economic issues. I am also trying to keep my home. I look for jobs, apply, hear nothing back, or am told I am either overqualified, underqualified, not good enough, or seen as undesirable because I have been unemployed for so long. Working wherever I can find may provide some income, but it usually isn't enough to live on. Yet it is often too much and causes me to lose benefits like Medicaid or food assistance. Some days I feel hopeful when I find a position that would be a perfect fit, and other days I feel like giving up, but I love my nephews and nieces too much to act on those feelings. I am frustrated because I worked hard for 30 years to reach this point, received excellent employee evaluations, and built a great reputation. I know I have contributed to the success of companies, yet through no fault of my own, I am at risk of losing everything. Story 13. There is always a way to make money. Just understand that your job does not define your worth. That is the rat race exerting its control over you. Story 14. The first few weeks are hopeful. Then it starts to drag. Every bit of unemployment and every dollar you had saved runs out. You begin to feel depressed and wish that the jobs you applied to would simply inform you of their decision instead of leaving you without any response. When you finally do get a job, as soon as the excitement fades, you almost immediately fall ill from being around new people and their germs. I would not recommend this experience. Story 15. I'm approaching a year since my life changed significantly. I experienced a challenging series of events. The company I was working for was sold. I became seriously ill, and I had to withdraw my retirement savings to support myself. I'm grateful to be alive, but it still feels unsettling to have been out of work for this long. Story 16. I had to quit my job to take care of my terminally ill wife. This has significantly impacted my resume, and I am working to get back on my feet. Story 17. A couple of years ago, it was rough at first, but I got used to it. Breaking the routine of the weekly work schedule was strange. I began to realize how I had been trained as a child to be controlled and manipulated in school, essentially to please bosses and managers. It is unpleasant. Now I am self-employed and do just enough work to pay my bills. Story 18. I actually loved it. There are many ways to make money here that do not require a full-time role. I prefer to save the majority of my earnings by working really hard for a few months and then living without a job for other months. It is absolutely worth it. It also helps that I do not spend money in the typical way, which allows my savings to last longer. Story 19. For 16 years it was pretty good, but I had to go to school, which was challenging. I think kindergarten was probably the easiest year. Story 20. Yes, I have been off long-term sick for just over 5 years. I didn't feel much about it, but sadly, I was judged a few times by people I knew. How's work going? Was an awkward question from family. Story 21. It was a miserable experience. In the mid-2000s, there was a jobless recovery, and individuals with 10 to 15 years of experience were applying for lower-level jobs. Those with 2 to 5 years of experience were being crowded out. I was unemployed for nearly a year. I felt worthless. I felt like I was outside of society. It was the worst moment I have ever experienced. Story 22. I was laid off from my job in May 2021. My soulmate and husband passed away that same year, a month earlier on April 21st, 2021. It was a difficult year for me, and I remained out of work for the rest of 2021. Fortunately, I had my family and friends to help me through it. Ironically, I was recently laid off again on March 27th, 2025, but I have secured another job. Story 23. I usually go about 2 to 3 months when I find myself out of work, and it's been several times. 2006, 2017, and now 2024, each lasting 2 to 3 months. In January 2024, I placed an ad on my local subreddit seeking any work, anything to do, and any pay with the assumption that I wouldn't be there long. I ended up being a carpenter's apprentice for over 2 months, then landed a job in my field again. It was the best experience I have had in a decade or more. Story 24. After I was laid off, I was unemployed for 2 weeks, and it felt like an eternity because I was very broke. I was off work for medical reasons for 6 weeks recently, but was still being paid. It was a dream. I didn't want to go back. Story 25. Helpless and without stability. I don't think people understand that being able to work is a privilege. It can be frustrating when you can't work but are expected to find a solution. Story 26. It was fun the first few months when I had my savings to help pay the bills and put food on the table. It was less fun in the later months when those savings were starting to run out. Story 27. Absolutely horrible. Your self-esteem plummets. Being concerned or scared about money is very stressful, and your life feels very restricted. Story 28. I was mostly unemployed for about 10 months after leaving my profession. I could not find replacement work, only managing to do some substitute teaching. I applied to dozens of jobs but heard nothing. It was the lowest point of my life. Eventually, in need of cash, I started washing dishes, which I did for about 2 years before returning to my field. Story 29. Yes, for 6 years. I went back to school at 28, completed my undergraduate degree, got married, and started a family during that time. I was laid off during the last major recession and couldn't find a job after 6 months of searching. That's why I decided to return to school. It was challenging being an older, broke college student, but I'm glad I did it, as it led me to my successful career today. Ultimately, it's not about the obstacle itself, like not having a job, but how you navigate it. Story 30. It has been 5 years now, but I am disabled and unable to work. It is stressful, to say the least, and hunger lingers, but I suppose you learn to appreciate things more. If I find 25 cents on the ground, I would be happy. Story 31. Thank you. I am disabled and try to work all the time, but it never seems to work out. Every Friday, like clockwork, I have seizures. I'm in my 30s and want to have at least a part-time job, but I am still struggling with my health. Story 32. I was unemployed from March 2020 to January 2022, which was the longest period of unemployment while not actively attending college. I loved it. Although I became a little restless, I found plenty to do. I enjoy being home and having the freedom to do what I want. I am immunocompromised, and after being laid off just before the COVID-19 shutdowns in the United States, my doctor advised me to lay low until a vaccine became available. Turned out to be a nice, long vacation. Story 33. I have been unemployed since September. First, I was fine and decided to take a couple of months off. Later, I found myself needing to address some issues in my mind, and now I'm dealing with depression that I'm trying to overcome. Story 34. The longest I have been unemployed was from mid-May 2021 to July 2021. It was a peaceful time for me. I had just left a job that was negatively affecting my mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Story 35. The best time of my life was when I played pickleball every day. I felt like the retirees who play there at 8 a.m. and noon. I was unemployed for 4 months. Story 36. It's great until the money runs out. Then you realize that having fun isn't always cheap, and you need to take steps to maintain the lifestyle you desire. I've never gotten myself into debt, but I have certainly spent a significant portion of my savings. Story 37. I was unemployed from 2010 to 2015, which left me severely depressed. It was demoralizing and significantly hindered my personal development. Even when I finally found work, I was a freelancer until 2022. People often say that comparison is the thief of joy, as if that magically solves everything, but it is disheartening to see all of my peers getting their own places, settling down, and starting families while I am in my 30s and still living in my family home. Story 38. I was unemployed for a year and a half. I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't had my cousins letting me live with them. It was a literal lifesaver. I was becoming a worsening alcoholic at my last place, consuming 10 to 15 beers a night, going to work, hating everything there, coming home, turning on the game and repeating the cycle. I had to get out of there. So when my cousins let me stay with them, I can't express how grateful I am. They also helped me get a new car, well, new to me at least. Story 39. An old friend of mine went 3 or 4 years without a job in his early 20s. He was miserable, had no money, and no working car, which meant he couldn't do anything. He was completely reliant on his friends to go anywhere or do anything. To his credit, he never took advantage of us, but his quality of life was terrible. He was horribly depressed the entire time. Work is challenging, but it's better than the alternative, in my opinion. Story 40. I took 1.5 years off work, during which I received unemployment benefits and saved a significant amount for my career. Next month, I will start a new job and am looking forward to it, although I enjoyed my time off. In 2017, I took a similar break for 5 months and traveled around Southeast Asia for 2 months. Story 41. Not enjoyable. Your mind can lead you to believe the worst. Self-worth and value decrease significantly, and it can feel like no one can help you. Story 42. For over a year, I was thankful to have freelance work to fall back on, but it was one of the worst times of my life, comparable to losing my father to cancer. It is often underestimated how much we tie our self-worth to work in our society. Being unemployed can feel like being invisible, worthless, and disconnected. Story 43. Getting another job has made me more miserable and is seriously damaging my health. But whatever, right? Story 44. I have been on this journey for over a year. 7 months ago, I was finally diagnosed and medicated for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which made me start to enjoy being alive again. Unfortunately, this realization led me to understand that I was being abused at home, and I needed to find alternative living arrangements, which was really difficult. 3 months later, I am finally feeling safe for the first time in my life. All of my energy was spent surviving, and I couldn't even think about working. However, being idle made me miserable, which only worsened my situation. I guess this means I am finally healing. I have 2 interviews this Friday. Story 45. I was laid off and spent 3 months enjoying my time unemployed. After that, I started applying for jobs and practicing my technical skills, but it was a major downturn in the job market for my industry, and I struggled to find a job for the next 8 months. Those 8 months were mentally tough for me, although I had a nice amount of savings to help me through. It still affected me financially to deplete so much of it, and even now I feel many steps behind my original pace regarding my financial security. Buying a house will certainly not happen for a while longer. Story 46. In 2010, I faced challenges while being single and without children, relying on extended unemployment benefits, which did not feel great. However, I have been working consistently since then, almost 8 years with my current company, where I am in a union trade and get hired out of the union hall. Despite the difficulties I encountered in 2010, things have definitely improved. Now, as a married individual with children, unemployment benefits will not suffice long-term. Story 47. I work seasonally and take 8 months off. It's amazing to actually have time and energy to see friends and family, pursue hobbies, sleep, and rest. Story 48. 10 months had passed, but I received a decent separation package. I was also taking on side work. However, my kids were younger and it weighed heavily on me. There were times when I would be driving, look in the mirror, and say to myself, I don't have a job. Story 49. I have a job where I can earn people's full salaries in 6 months quite easily. It is common to experience layoffs for a couple of months each year when you start. These are the best months of my life. Story 50. I am disabled. I went from being a workaholic to not being able to take care of myself. A social worker told me to apply for benefits last week. I have never felt more useless or depressed in my life. Story 51. My wife was laid off in a difficult way in November 2023. I knew it was the beginning of a downturn in Canada and figured she might be out of work for approximately 6 to 8 months, given the labor market was unfavorable. It has been 18 months. She has felt incredibly dejected. I support her when I can, but I know at times it goes in one ear and out the other. Story 52. Back in 2010 and 2011, it was one of the worst years of my life. Luckily, I had family to stay with, but having no money meant I had no choice but to stay home all day and look for work. I would get a weekly ride to the library and check out several books to pass the time. No one was hiring in my area. This was before the ride-sharing and food delivery services became popular, so they could not be a source of income. Story 53. I was unemployed for 2 years after my industry collapsed. It felt like I was a ghost, invisible to the world, sending out countless resumes. Then I freelanced for very little pay and gradually rebuilt my career. Now, I am grateful for the resilience it instilled in me. Survival teaches lessons that success never can. Story 54. I have experience in both standard employment and freelancing. Personally, I prefer freelancing. I manage stress well. Although it is not always enjoyable living paycheck to paycheck and constantly searching for clients and projects, it can be rewarding. In many ways, I feel much more in control of my life and time. Story 55. Almost a year. First, it was nice. My job closed, so I received some money for the first few months because it was their fault. The summer, since I was let go in May, was a blast. I had money for doing nothing and was free the whole summer. It was great. But then everyone I knew returned to their jobs or studies around September, and I felt so bored. I began to feel bad, like I wasn't contributing to society. I applied for jobs but didn't get any because I hadn't attended university. The deadline for applying to university had passed as well, so I had to wait about 4 months to apply for the next semester. I felt unaccomplished and like a freeloader. Story 56. From 2011 to 2013, I came very close to committing suicide. I struggled to support myself, and my friends constantly had to help me out financially. It was a tough situation. Story 57. It was a difficult time for me. I left a job because the hours were overwhelming without having another opportunity lined up. Shortly after, I broke my right fibula while skateboarding and didn't have a job until about 2 months ago. This all began around June of last year. Story 58. One company closed, and the other was bought out just before COVID-19, resulting in my position being eliminated. Both times I was out of work for a couple of years. I had plenty of savings, so we were fine. My wife still worked, so we had insurance. I spent a lot of time with my children, volunteering at school and coaching sports. It was a good time. Story 59. It depends on whether it's your choice, such as taking a gap year, having savings, or traveling, or not your choice, such as being unable to find a job or being broke. The first choice feels pretty amazing. Yes, it can be boring, but it feels like this is what life is all about if you take advantage of it and don't just lie in bed all day. The second scenario feels debilitating, and my stomach drops just thinking about it. It is especially difficult for people with no support from family and friends. It's unsettling to be anxious about your next meal. Story 60. In the last 4 years, I have been unemployed twice. The first time was after a move while finishing school, and the second time was after being let go during a round of layoffs. Both periods of unemployment lasted longer than 6 months and were extremely stressful. I applied for unemployment insurance, and my family supported me, but being without an income for that long was terrifying. I applied to 5 to 15 jobs on average every day, and it still took me 6 months to find work. This happened twice. I now strive to be the best person on my team to avoid any possible reason for a layoff, and I still worry about unforeseen layoffs or cuts to my industry. Story 61. I lost a significant amount of weight, which was a relief because I was starving. I learned that you really don't need much food to get by, just the basics. However, that's not good for your health. It's interesting how you stop craving things when you're completely broke. You just need sustenance. Thanks to my friends, I managed to keep a roof over my head, but it was only by a slim margin. I present myself well, so probably no one knew how close I was to being homeless. Story 62. About a year ago, it feels depressing. You find ways to keep yourself busy, like cleaning and organizing. Watching your bank account slowly dwindle makes you unsure if you'll have enough next month. I would not recommend this experience. Story 63. I was a stay-at-home mom for 12 years. I was definitely working, and I adore my kids, but it can be an intensely lonely experience, and I felt depressed at times. I started working as a paraprofessional a few years ago. I'm not exactly making a lot of money, but I have discovered a deep passion for working with children with special needs. It's been a transformative experience for me. I hope you are doing well. Story 64. I was unemployed for close to a year. After 10 months, I was able to get a new job, but it was terrible. You really start to feel it, and I'm not one for the idea that the universe gives you what you put out, but it's hard to get hired when you feel so depressed and down on yourself. I'm in my mid-40s now, and other than that one stretch back when I was around 25, I've never left a job without having another lined up. When I switch jobs, my new employers always say they loved my confidence in the job interview. I realized that when I was unemployed, I had no confidence and I probably bombed every single job interview because I came across as really sad. I remember specifically going to one job interview during a blizzard. I had called to see if they could reschedule because it was a 40-minute drive. When they said no, I made it there despite the weather. It turns out I was the only one who made it through the snow, so I thought, this is a sure thing. Nope, they rescheduled everyone else's interviews, and I had gotten the interview through a recruiter who was equally frustrated with me. During this time, I was fortunate enough to move back in with my parents. I had always gotten along with them well enough, but not this time. Even though this was around 2005, my dad still thought I was supposed to be walking around with a resume in my hand, going into buildings and asking to talk to the managers. At one point, I became so depressed and hated being home that I got a job at a local movie theater. They hired me on the spot. My dad was so upset with me, saying something along the lines of, "You have a $200,000 college degree. You're not working nights for minimum wage." Story 65. It took me a long time to find a job after finishing university in a small town in Eastern Europe. I went to interviews but received only promises or very low salaries. Finally, I met a woman who was dating a friend of mine. While we were having lunch, she mentioned that she was getting ready to interview some workers, so I asked if they needed an assistant. I worked there for 7 years and loved the people and the environment. I left after my son was diagnosed with autism. However, thanks to my experience there, I found a remote job with better pay. I did spend 4 years between these jobs. Story 66. The most ironic thing about being broke is that the emotional stress makes you crave a drink, but you cannot even afford one. Story 67. Does COVID count? I started working when I was 15 and never stopped until COVID hit when I was 21. At first, it was fun, especially since the government relief benefit was more than I was making hourly. Then it became less fun. I actually went out and tried to get jobs because I was very bored. I accidentally ended up with 3 jobs at once. Story 68. I just took 4 months off from middle to upper management for most of my adult life, and I genuinely realized the beauty of being happy and living within my means. I have an extensive resume in business, but I am currently applying for jobs that make me happy. I took the leap, and it is beautiful. Story 69. 4 months last year were the best 4 months of the last 25 years of my life. There were no alarms, no commute, and no forced socialization with people I do not like. It was amazing. Story 70. I was caught off guard by a moving box from a previous employee. I had a unique skill set that my coworkers and my intended replacement did not possess. I was unemployed in 2008 and did not find a job for 11 months. My former boss even called me to return and train my replacement, but I politely declined. That former company closed 18 months later, and my former boss was let go soon after. Our parent organization was clearly ineffective, so I feel I avoided a negative situation. Story 71. A few times for 2 to 3 months, I felt miserable and stressed about everything because everything costs money. I had to rely on my savings for a car to get to work so I could eat while I submitted dozens of applications, receiving only 4 responses in one interview. I found myself extremely irritable and constantly arguing with my partner about the expense of everything. I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone who has to support themselves. Story 72. I lost my job during COVID-19. We had unemployment stimulus and I received a good severance package. It was still a difficult time, and I empathize with anyone in that situation. Job searching is particularly challenging when it is necessary. When you must find a job, you tend to compromise much more on your requirements for the next position. As someone who was single and without children, I also feel for those in similar circumstances. Story 73. I miss meeting new people and the excitement of sparking a genuine connection with a stranger whom I will likely never see again. I don't speak the language of my new home very well yet, so it is incredibly hard to make friends. Story 74. Years after finishing school, life wasn't as simple as finding a job at a nearby store. It was interview after interview, surviving until the next government assistance, mentally deteriorating and feeling useless, often dwelling on dark thoughts. It took the arrival of COVID-19 and a halt to immigration for me to finally secure a real full-time job. Life is better now, but occasional memories of those dark times still surface when I lie in bed before sleeping. Story 75. I was out of work for 6 months. 3 months were planned, and even with a supportive partner who kept a roof over my head, it was stressful and depressing. We got a puppy, which is why the 3 months off were planned. I worked for a high school, so I knew I would be out of work during the summer months. What I didn't know was that unemployment benefits would be denied. Having my dog saved my sanity. It gave me a reason to get up early every day, and training him became my full-time job. I was also finishing my prerequisites for nursing school, which provided some structure in my life during the first 3 months. Once summer ended, I had completed my prerequisites, and when the bad weather set in, it became really hard. I was battling unemployment for benefits, trying to find a job, and figuring out how I would pay for nursing school once I was accepted. Being without a job for 6 months showed me how much I need structure and purpose. I definitely need money too, but the lack of a sense of contribution had the greatest impact on my mental health. Story 76. For 3 months, I was a single dad with 5 kids, which was very challenging. This was in the early 2000s when tough man contests in bars were popular. I participated in every one for 3 months. The prize money ranged from $250 to $500. My kids motivated me. They never noticed a difference or knew that I wasn't working. Story 77. Oh, absolutely. For nearly a year after getting married and moving to a new city, I was living the dream. Best phase of my life, hands down. But then, sitting alone at home became unexciting quickly. So, I decided to rejoin the world and started working again this January. Because, boredom is the ultimate motivator. Story 78. The United States is based on hustle culture, so there is a stigma attached to being unemployed. Can make you feel inadequate. Anyone new you meet asks what you do, and people who know you are unemployed often inquire if you have found a job and give unhelpful suggestions. The reality is that, post-COVID, most people either have experience with being laid off or know others who do, and many are struggling to find new employment, which is taking longer. The toll on your mental and physical health is significant. As a short-term contractor who is always looking for work, here are my tips, in no particular order. 1. Keep a routine. Wake up and go to bed at the same time, take a shower, and leave the house every day. If you have a laptop, make finding a job your job. Dedicate up to 3 hours each day to actively search for work. Target your applications and leverage any professional networks. I recommend the public library for this. There is usually one nearby where you can use free Wi-Fi without having to purchase anything. Get outside every day. Maintain a 5-day work schedule, avoiding work on weekends to keep that time for yourself. Staying optimistic can be challenging as you watch your bank account dwindle. It's important to remain proactive. While I won't say everything always works out, because that's simply not true, it can help to stay positive. Keep a routine and make it a point to go outside every day, rain or shine, especially if you live alone. During my first significant unemployment stretch, I obtained a motorcycle license through a local community college, which provided bikes and helmets. In another stretch, I completed my last 9 credits and earned my degree. In yet another, I pursued a drone license. It may be difficult to see, but if there are activities you have always wanted to try, particularly those that are free, like visiting museums or zoos, or using resources like 3D printers or metal detectors at the public library, consider checking some items off your list. Good luck. The mental aspect can be the toughest. Story 79. Yes, about a year in a recession years ago when I was around 21, I was made redundant. After getting a new job, I was made redundant again less than a year later. I felt really low. I lived with my parents, but they still wanted their contribution from my benefits. I also had car insurance, catalog payments, a credit card, and an overdraft. I just couldn't get by. It was really miserable being broke. Eventually, I got a Christmas job in a bookshop, so I arranged with the bank to not take all my wages for the overdraft. After that, there were no jobs available. A few months later, after having my driving license for 3 years, I got a taxi license and drove my dad's cab when he wasn't using it. He was also struggling financially, so he paid me hourly just under the threshold for tax and national insurance contributions. I worked 6.5 days a week to pay off my debts and finally have some money for myself. I got married and had a baby. By then, my dad was doing better, so he bought a car for me to use after maternity leave, and I was able to keep what I earned, just paying him rent. Times can be tough. It taught me not to accumulate debt, to save for what I want, and to work hard. I did have another office job later, but I was made redundant 3 years later. I changed jobs, got made redundant again 3 months later, and finally decided to return to self-employment. I just don't trust other people. What was the question? I got lost in reminiscing. Story 80. I was let go in December, and I have been studying to improve my skills. I believe that working on my skills has helped me maintain a positive attitude. Story 81. The 2008 crash lasted about 9 months. It was an incredible time. I collected unemployment and spent most of my time flying, fishing, and camping by rivers. This experience changed my perspective on life and revealed the true nature of the rat race. Story 82. It is awful and dehumanizing. Living with abusive parents makes it even more difficult. I had to save every single coin or bill I had just to get by. Story 83. The longest time was 6 months, split into 4 months, 2 weeks, and 6 weeks. It was fantastic. I received supplemental pay at 70% of my base salary, and it was before corporate inflation really took off. It was essentially a 6-month vacation, and after working 6 days a week for years, it was greatly appreciated. I am aware of how fortunate I am and make sure not to take it for granted. Story 84. For nearly a decade, I struggled with depression, which made it increasingly difficult to find employment. The lack of a job only worsened my situation. Story 85. 6 weeks out of work after surgery. Boredom really set in after about 2 weeks. My friends were not around since they all had jobs. Story 86. For me, it was right when I had my first child. I mostly work in information technology contracting. I was working a full-time position as a data analyst when a new contracting opportunity came my way. Everything was ready to go. The statement of work was signed, and the purchase order was agreed upon with the agency. The last thing needed was one signature. It was guaranteed, but that guarantee fell through. This opportunity would have been amazing, and I left my job for it because the return it would have provided for my family was significant. I then found myself out of work for a year. I applied to almost 30,000 positions during that time and received very few responses, maybe 4 interviews. Despite my certifications and experience, it seemed to mean nothing. I recently secured another information technology contract that pays reasonably well, and they plan to transition me to a full-time position with a substantial raise, ensuring I can work on multiple projects for clients. This would be incredible if it materializes, but I'm not holding my breath. I'm poised to transition from this contract to another shortly thereafter. Since December, the job market for contracting has significantly improved, which is a relief. What did I learn from all of this? Don't trust anyone for anything, even if they are close friends or family. The moment you enter an office or log into your email, you are no longer family. You are coworkers, even in a family business. Story 87. I have been unemployed for 4 months, 6 months, and 9 months since graduating from college. The 9-month period was uneventful as it was right after college. Being frugal during this time was normal. The 6-month period was noteworthy because I worked for a technology company that shut down. They provided us with a 6-month retention bonus to stay until the end, making it also somewhat unremarkable. The 4-month period was recent and felt dreadful because, as an adult with debt, car payments, and rent, I felt trapped. Story 88. I was very young and collected unemployment for about 8 months. I loved it, but I was only 19 and had no major expenses. Story 89. Going through it now, and it is frustrating how companies and recruiters show no respect for your time. They ghost you after multiple interviews. It has been almost 9 months, and the issue of these ridiculous case studies continues, with no good opportunities lined up. Story 90. I worked from 12 to 51, until health forced me to retire. I never missed a day unless I was in a hospital. Story 91. I got fired from my job. I was young, on my own with a mortgage and car payments, and I had no emergency fund. I had to ask my parents for money and came very close to losing my condo. A year later, I have a decent paying job and everything is settled. Despite it taking a long time to get hired, it does get better. You just have to keep looking. It's all you can do. It took me about 7 months to find a new job. Story 92. I was unemployed for about a year, from November 2017 to August 2018. I applied to around 300 jobs, had one interview, and didn't secure a job until my sister helped me get a position at the factory where she worked in quality assurance. It was difficult. I felt severely depressed, alone, and like a failure. Story 93. I am 66 years old and self-employed, but I prefer to call it involuntarily semi-retired. Yesterday, I applied for a job for which I meet all the qualifications. I do not expect any response again. Story 94. I feel bored, anxious, frustrated, and depressed from not hearing back after my resume submission and interview. I have been told that I am a great candidate, but I am considered too close to retirement age. Story 95. I guess unemployment hits differently when you're not American. Here you receive a good amount of money, usually based on a certain percentage of your average salary since your last period of unemployment. So, if you earned €3,000 a month, you receive €2,000 a month in unemployment benefits. Typically, it lasts for as long as you have previously been employed. My last period of unemployment lasted 7 months. It was great. I took some time for myself, figured out what I wanted to do, and enjoyed life. I returned to full-time freelancing after 3 months and was thankfully allowed to continue receiving benefits during that time, since I was already a freelancer during my previous employment. It was considered a continuation of an existing activity. This was my 3rd time being unemployed in the past 17 years. Each time lasted between a few months to a year, and each time was fairly pleasant. However, if I do nothing for too long, I feel a lack of purpose. Story 96. My partner has been unemployed for over a year. It breaks my heart because she is so smart and motivated that any employer would be lucky to have her. Do you have any advice on how I can help her or any job search strategies that have worked for you? Story 97. I was fired in 2002 and was unemployed for about 2 years. It was difficult because I had to move back home after being independent for a decade. It was a significant blow to my ego. Fortunately, the unemployment office sided with me, but it was still a challenging experience. Story 98. It was the worst 6 months of my life, and I had some pretty bad experiences before that. I contemplated suicide on multiple occasions during that time. I wanted to take advantage of the newfound free time I had to do things I had been wanting to do while employed, but I was just too depressed and didn't have any money. In the end, unemployment cost me about $20,000, so I now keep that as a bare minimum in my emergency fund. In a way, it was a friendship litmus test. I lost a number of friends during that time, but the ones who stood by me and made sure I didn't harm myself are now my best and closest friends. Story 99. For a bit more than a year, it was enjoyable to game all day. However, over time, I wanted to pursue my own interests and become financially independent. During this period, I was living at home and felt quite guilty that my dad had to cover my expenses while I was just relaxing and gaming. Story 100. In total, it has been about a year, and I was feeling somewhere in the middle. Don't get me wrong, I usually hate work, but at least it provided a steady paycheck. It's pleasant to be able to wake up whenever, but then you realize you can't actually do anything because unemployment only pays a fraction of what you were previously making. It becomes nothing but hanging out at home and applying for jobs for hours on end, just to receive the disappointing "thank you for your consideration" emails. Not to mention figuring out how to pay for medication or dental treatment, feeling bad because you can't take your spouse out, and the constant worries that your resume gap is getting bigger by the day. Long story short, when I have a job, I want to be unemployed. But when I'm unemployed, I want a job. Story 101. After I got out of the Air Force, the following 6 months were rough. I felt like I couldn't provide for my family the way I was supposed to. It was a difficult time. Story 102. The longest I have been unemployed was 2 months. I was laid off from my factory job due to a virus that affected our products. Story 103. I was unemployed for about 11 months. 4 of those months, I was hired for a job and waiting for paperwork to process with no start date in sight. That was excruciating, but it was a major career move, so it was worth the wait. I had to immerse myself in activities. I started journaling extensively and worked on personal projects since I am a photographer. I did anything I could think of to make ends meet, from flipping items on online marketplaces to freelancing and donating plasma. I sold everything I possibly could and depleted all my savings. I had a family to support, so the stress was intense. We made it, but it's an experience I hope to never go through again. Story 104. I have been unemployed for a little over a year now. It is miserable, especially after working at the same company for almost 18 years. Thankfully, the severance package was generous and is helping me stay afloat. The worst part is not having that daily routine. Story 105. Going on 4 months. It's tough. The worst part is receiving auto-replies or responses that make no sense from companies you apply to, not to mention those filled with spelling and grammar issues. Story 106. For 8 months after the Great Recession and for 7 months more recently after the increased interest rates affected my industry, I felt miserable and hopeless both times. I was worried about money, and I had internalized the societal viewpoint that one's value is determined by their job and earnings. I rallied each time and felt scrappy and optimistic about finding a new job, but after hundreds of applications and rejections, things fell apart. Eventually, things turned around, but it is not an experience I want to repeat, especially as an older worker now. Story 107. I was unemployed for 6 months when my industry, film, was on strike. It was terrible. It ended a young but promising relationship, strained several friendships, and affected my family. The self-doubt was overwhelming. I have always tied my identity to my career and success, so this situation severely impacted my self-esteem. I thought I had backup options, but my backup was technology, which was also experiencing massive layoffs at the time. However, the interesting part came after the film industry returned, and I started working again 1.5 years ago. I made numerous lifestyle changes during that period, and they continued to be enforced. I began working 80 to 100 hours a week and have basically maintained that schedule ever since. I transitioned into another career and have been working there part-time, but I now worry about the stability of that career option. I feel the need to develop new skills to prevent this situation from happening to me again. The short-term effects of unemployment were financial and physical, but the long-term impact cannot be underestimated. Story 108. I took about a year off in 2021 and had a great time. I had an extremely high-stress job that paid ridiculously well. Eventually, the stress became overwhelming, and the golden handcuffs lost their appeal, so I quit on the spot one morning. I spent a couple of months traveling and spending time with family, staying up late, playing video games, and having fun. I had some kids and spent 6 months at home with them. I was planning to take another year off, but one night I had too much to drink and applied for a dream job. To my surprise, I got the job. Now I work for a great company that pays even more than my last job but requires less than half the effort. Honestly, quitting on the spot was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. It also taught me to have a healthy respect for work-life boundaries and to understand that work problems can stay at work. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.